to attend our virtual information session?
They're on, so I'll go in here. We're gonna-
Looks like we lost a Catherine.
You're in your got it. That's what I did. I clicked leave meeting. So here we go. Play slideshow from start. There we go. Max Kirchner, may I introduce you to begin our presentation with some goals and objectives in the background of our grant information.
By all means. So I am Max Kirchner. As Catherine said, I helped her write the grant proposal that has us sitting here today. So I share some partial blame for that. And I am just going to give you some sort of broad strokes on what we're trying to accomplish with this grant. So directly from the National Park Service, the grant itself is intended to foster economic development in rural communities through the rehabilitation of historic buildings in those communities. So immediately we have a few things that directly are tied to to this money. It pains me to say it is something like an investment. The federal government is trying to invest in rural communities and they want to see a return on that investment. So we're going to split this into two sort of we have four categories in our broad goals and objectives. Two of them are softer, and we'll start with those, and then there'll be those sort of harder economic development side that we'll touch on here in a little bit later. But I wanted to start here with why we chose theaters in particular. And I'm sure that you folks are familiar, at least at some level, with the Idaho Heritage Trust at this point. And we thought that theaters themselves speak really directly to our organization's mission. And that we aim to preserve both the buildings and the stories that they embody. And what buildings contain more stories than a theater. Not only do you have the patrons coming in every day, you have the story of the building itself. You also have the amazing stories that unfold on stage and screen. So to go on to that, our first main soft goal be on top of I'm going to leave aside sort of the restoration and preservation side. We're going to get much more into the technical side of that here shortly, but that is sort of folded into why we chose these theaters. They're iconic. They're often in, very, they're indelible for the landscape in which they land, whether they're in the main hub, whether they're on their own. They're beautiful and they deserve to be protected. And one of the main things that one of the secondary objectives here, or not secondary, one of the other objectives alongside of that is to provide access to arts and culture to rural communities. Now, I don't think I have to explain to you why we believe that is important, but we also believe that theaters provide this sort of vital cog in social life for rural communities. Not only do they provide access to specific theater events, live performances, and things like that. As things have gone on, they wear many hats that they've taken on. They can be communal meeting spaces. They host events, accommodating film and traditional live spaces in the same areas, hold fundraisers and graduations. Oftentimes in areas, these are the only secular spaces that provide these services. And so we think they're of vital importance for that as well. So I want to give some statistics for the numerically minded among us real quick. That Idaho is home to about 21,000 art-related jobs. The industry generates about $2 billion annually. So we may think of ourselves as, a small portion of the pie. To dig in a little bit, it is significantly larger than one might think at first blush. So 58% of Idaho's adults attend at least one live artistic performance per year. That was defined as music, theater, or dance. We're hoping that we can help increase that with towards the end of this production here. But just thinking alone, that's well over 1 million people who are going to the theater at least once a year. On top of that, the average historic theater in Idaho attracts about 60% of its audience from further than 5 miles away. So we may think of these like quaint little buildings or quaint places that, you know, are sort of hyper specific. Turns out actually folks are willing to travel a good deal to go see, you know, a good movie or a good play and have a nice night out. So to tie this back into the subgrant objective, we think that it's you know, extremely important to ensure that our rural communities in particular have access to the arts and culture that are provided by an historic theater. The events and experiences can be life-changing, life-affirming, and have the capacity to open people up to new perspectives and experiences. I think that's I'm preaching to the choir there just a tad. So thank you for bearing with me here. And we'll get into some of the more economic development portion of this here through Main Street stabilization, and then also this as a conduit to allowing folks to capitalize on the growing Idaho population and increasing inheritance. So it has commonly been said that the local Main Street programs are of vital importance. I keep saying the word vital, I apologize. I can't get that one out of my vocabulary today. But they rarely receive the technical assistance and really money from state and federal organizations. Lucky for us, we have some federal money to be able to help invest in these hubs of industry. And even if they're not directly on Main Street, they're often situated in commercial hubs. And that provides a great opportunity for many ancillary businesses to benefit from consistent, frequent access to theater programming. So we have 2 economic studies from the last few years that show that every dollar spent at a theater generates about $2 in the local economy. And then to put that in perspective, our friends over in Oregon did a similar theater grant, and they had an economic impact report that said for every ticket bought at one of their historic theaters, about $24.50 were distributed out into the rest of the community. So the goal of the grant then here is to help get our theaters up, open, operational, accessible, and be able to provide sort of consistent programming. We found that the more consistent programming there can be, the more consistent the economic impact happens, and you know, people can count on that sort of foot traffic that is only provided by consistent theater programming. If you want an example, we have a great test case in the Wilson Theater in Rupert. We have a story on our website, and our let's see, Kelly Anthon was the city planner during that, also now Idaho State Senator. So if you have any questions about how sort of a revitalized theater can have a profound impact on a small town, I highly recommend you check out those stories or ask him about his personal experience there. Let's see. So yeah, they have both a great opportunity for the theater themselves and the surrounding community. It's something that people can get really excited about, can drive interest both within the community and throughout the state. We're hoping to capitalize on a lot of, you know, this is a big newsworthy event, and we want to make sure that we capitalize on every opportunity that this provides for folks, which leads me conveniently to our stimulating heritage tourism as the final objective for this. So according to the 2020 census, Idaho is the 2nd fastest growing state in the country. So a lot of that is, of course, in, you know, major metropolitan hubs, but they are finding that folks are going out and exploring their new home. Surprise, surprise. So let's see. So investing in amenities and infrastructure of our rural communities, we're trying to make them attractive destinations for residents to explore their heritage, history, and the culture of their new home. And so the top 2 activities for folks going outside of their new home were to explore historic places and for culture activities and events. So we found that theaters happen to be the perfect confluence of those 2 things. So and we found that overnight tourism is on the rise. Day trips are still, you know, are a huge portion of it. And as I said before, you know, our theaters tend to attract folks from a much broader area than one might initially believe. So grant funding, you know, we're hoping can help see to the physical needs of the structures and allowing folks to be able to provide better access to consistent programming, freeing up time and funds to capitalize on the marketing and outreach opportunities, and to just, you know, provide access to arts and culture to our rural communities. Speaking of funding and a little bit more of the nitty gritty, Catherine, did I miss anything? I can hand it right on over to you.
Nope, you did a great job. Thank you, Max.
Fabulous. My pleasure.
So my name is Catherine Kirk. I'm the Executive Director of the Idaho Heritage Trust. I'm going to briefly go over the overview. As many of you have already heard, we were awarded by the National Park Service $750,000 grant to give out subgrants for historic theater, historic preservation in the rural communities of Idaho. This project is supported through the Historic Preservation Fund, and it's ministered by the National Park Service, the Department of Interior. These funds are intended for very large scale, high cost historic preservation projects that are fundamental to the continued use of our historic theaters in Idaho. We estimate that of that grant amount, $700,000 will be given out in subgrants to historic theater organizations around our state and rural communities. The range of grants we are asking for are anywhere from $15,000 on the minimum side to $100,000 maximum. We expect that most grant applicants will be asking somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 for their projects. There is a required 10% match from the applicants, meaning if your project costs $100,000, then the highest amount you can ask for in the subgrant funds would be $90,000, and the remaining $10,000 would be your responsibility. The award funding is going to be funded from two areas. 90% of the funding will come from the Historic Preservation Fund, and 10% will come from the Idaho Heritage Trust Endowment. Our grant period, we have a lot to get going and to express to you today on the process to get to an application. But once we have selected the subgrantees and we award a grant, that will then begin the grant period. So any project to costs that may be incurred from now until you have signed a grant award agreement would not qualify for any of the subgrant funds. So only after a grant award agreement has been executed by the successful applicants can you start then spending the money towards your grant project. And we expect that date to be somewhere around December 2023. And I have a timeline and process later in the presentation. I'll walk you through the steps so you'll understand how that December 23 fits into the overall timeline. This is a reimbursement grant, so that the work must be complete before submitting a request to the Idaho Heritage Trust for reimbursement. We will allow progress payments to be allowed. So if you finish a portion, you can submit for a request for that portion of the project, because we know, and if you were to do a full $100,000 grant and then ask for reimbursement, that's a lot to carry for our historic theaters. So we're trying to make this work as best as we can for everybody to be successful. Eligibility, I'm going to introduce Shannon Sardell. Shannon is our historical architect, and I'll let her speak to the eligibility of this project.
Well, first I need to unmute myself. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Max. It is a pleasure to be working with the Idaho Heritage Trust on this project. In defining what a historic theater is, there are many buildings that we use for arts and entertainment today, and how we use theater. But the purpose of this grant is to work with properties that were originally designed and constructed with the purpose as a venue for performance or movies, film of some sort, or any, as you can see there on the slide, any combination. It does include drive-in movie theaters. We would like them to be currently being used for the above purposes. So we'd like you to be able to reuse these for a dramatic performance and the film screenings, or to bring back the drive-in movie theater experience. But if it is closed, we are hoping that will, this grant will help revitalize and provide kind of stimulus to reopen your historic theaters. The other thing for the eligibility, historic theater properties need to be at least 50 years old. And this is something that comes straight out of the National Register of Historic Places. So, you know, something that is 50 years or older will be considered as a property that is eligible for this grant. applicants that are eligible include all of these you see there, the private property owners, state, tribal, local governments, certified local governments, nonprofit and tax exempt organizations. So there's a whole host of different organizations that can apply. And again, we've talked about rural communities a couple times, but for this grant and the purposes of this grant, we are looking at communities that are less populated with less than 50,000 people.
And just to jump in briefly, that is as defined by the National Park Service. So unfortunately, we don't have any say over what we can define a rural community as or as.
All right, thank you, Catherine, for switching the slide. I usually am control of my own slides, so having somebody else being in charge and driving is new. So the eligible projects, we're looking at providing these grants for bricks and mortar historic preservation projects. There are a number of different types of eligible bricks and mortar projects. The most, imperative types of repairs would be to stabilize, repair the historic resource, the historic building. Other measures, it could be that there's a physical condition or deterioration of historic and character defining materials and features that need to happen as part of the preservation process. Historic character defining materials and features are those types of materials that can be and are part of the theater historically. This should be, if there shouldn't be recreation or we're not looking at recreating something that we cannot prove was there. So any character defining feature, there may need to be some photographic evidence of historically having that feature present in your historic resource. Another eligibility area are upgrades to mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems or other code-related work that can enhance the property's accessibility and functional requirements. But the caveat with that type of eligibility is that the actual project needs, those sorts of systems projects, as I would like to call them, need to be part of a actual restoration or larger project. So an example might be that you want to do some mechanical upgrades, but it needs to be paired with some wall plaster preservation component or something that is of historic nature. So it can't just be, we're going to upgrade the heating and cooling system for the theater. It needs to actually be paired with heating and cooling and some repair of something historic. The historic character needs to be part of that upgrade process. Restoring any historic theater as it appeared during an era of significance by means of removal of features and other periods of reconstruction of missing features can happen upon review, like I just suggested, but it needs to be very, very clear that there is photographic evidence available to prove or to substantiate, as the big word is here, the approach. So this is a preservation grant process, and we'd like to provide as much support as possible, but this is not necessarily a reconstruction of something without some sort of photographic drawing evidence that what the project will be was actually there originally, and also meets something we'll talk about a little bit later, the standards of treatment for historic properties. Soft costs for the architectural engineering services may be included, but they cannot exceed 20% of your total cost or what you are to ask for. Here's a list of ineligible projects. We cannot construct new theaters, reconstruction of an historic theater property, acquisition or purchase of an historic theater, relocating historic theaters or work on relocated theater no longer eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places, landscaping, parking, general site improvements, unless you're working with ADA access and trying to make the building more accessible to a larger population or to your broader community. Also, ineligible projects would include work completed or funded through other federal programs. Some of these eligibility or ineligibility requirements, again, as Max has emphasized, are coming straight from the National Park Service, who administer the grant. So, of course, the subgrants have to follow the same rules. Also, as Catherine had mentioned, work needs to be completed during the funding cycle of the grant. Work completed outside the grant that you would do before the grant is awarded does not count as eligible in doing the grant. And then other routine maintenance and other long-term maintenance beyond the grant period. So there is a set start and finish date of the grant once the grant is awarded. Within that, what you have applied for, there you can be funded for. All right. The last part of the eligibility, I think this is the last part. It has your theater needs to be eligible or to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places. There is a multiple property listing. I know our State Historic Preservation Office will share some information with that here shortly. But the theater that is going to apply for this grant needs to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places or eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places. All properties funded shall be listed on the National Registers by the completion of the project. And Idaho Heritage Trust will complete or help with the assisting of completing that nomination with funding that is through this subgrant program. The funding used for the nominations will not come out of your direct ask of the funding. Your grant will be for the actual project.
Thank you, Shannon.
Absolutely.
So I'd like to introduce Jason Fox with the State Historic Preservation Office, and Jason's going to give you some. There you are, Jason. Are you on?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you great. I'll let you take over. Thank you.
Thanks. Good morning, everybody. So for those of you that might not be familiar with the National Register program, it's the official national list of properties that are considered important to our past and worthy of preservation. The National Park Service manages the program in partnership with the state historic preservation offices in each state. So to be considered eligible, a property must meet standards set forth by the National Park Service, and I'll talk about that a little more in a minute. Catherine, am I able to share my screen to pull up that National Register map?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay.
Now you should be able to.
Okay, let me try. Here we go. Share. Okay, can everyone see the map? Okay. Okay. All right, so to the first step in this process is determining if your theater is already listed in the National Register. And this is the map that our office maintains of National Register properties in Idaho. So the first step, the quickest and most efficient way to find out if your theater is listed is to check this map. And you can search by either entering the theater's name or the address. So let's just really quickly do a couple of sample searches. I'm going to search for the Blue Fox Theater in Grangeville. Sorry, it's being a little slow. Let me try that again. Here we go. So when you complete a search, you'll get pulled up to the community that you're searching for. And what you'll see sometimes are a series of little blue dots. Let me zoom in a little bit. And so this dot represents the Blue Fox Theater. So you can click it on and it will take you right here to a link to the National Register nomination for the theater. So that obviously indicates that it is already listed. Another way that you can search is by looking at historic districts. So let's look at the Wilson Theater in Rupert. Here we go. Whoops. Let's see. Sorry about that. Okay, here we go. So it's going to pull up a map. Here it should. Just bear with me for a second. Okay, so it's pulling up a map of Rupert, and you'll see this kind of pink shaded area. And that indicates that the theater is listed as part of a historic district. So again, here it pulls up a link to the nomination. And when this nomination comes up, you'll see it's the link to the Rupert Town Square Historic District. So the two ways you can find a theater, or if you see an individual dot for it, it might mean that it's individually listed. If you see one of these pink shaded areas, that means it may be listed as part of a historic district. So if you check the nomination, you'll be able to confirm that. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and go back to the slide. So if you have difficulty locating information on the map, please reach out to me. My contact information is listed here on the slide that Catherine is sharing. So if your theater is not listed in the National Register, the next step is to complete what we call a preliminary eligibility questionnaire. And this document will be linked on the grant information website. And it's pretty self-explanatory. It explains what types of information we need, generally historical information about the theater, and then some photographs, current photographs, historic photographs are also great if you have any. So again, if you have any questions about completing the questionnaire, please feel free to contact me and I can help you with that. So let me talk a little bit now about what happens when you submit a questionnaire to our office. How our office evaluates historic properties for National Register eligibility. We really look at three areas. We look at the property's age, its significance, and its integrity. So as Shannon mentioned, is the property old enough to be considered historic? So generally 50 years old. Significance, typically for a theater, we look at historical significance, often in the category of entertainment and recreation, and or architectural significance. And then the final thing that we look at is historic integrity. And what this means is how well does the property represent the period or theme for which it is being considered? Does it still look much the way it did in the past? So our office will expedite the review of questionnaires as we receive them. You know, we're very excited about working with all of you on this grant process. And again, feel free to contact me with any questions.
Thank you, Jason. Really appreciate your insight.
Thanks.
So the first step in our process is a letter of intent. And the idea behind the letter of intent is just to find out who's interested in this grant and the eligibility of that organization or business owner applying. So the letter of intent is pretty basic and pretty simple. I don't want anybody to be scared by it. There will include general questions about property ownership, what type of organization, and the status of your business. So is it privately owned? Who's the private owner? Or is it a nonprofit that owns the theater? Or who will be the applicant? Maybe it's a nonprofit that it's going to apply as the applicant, but it's actually privately owned. Any scenario would work. We just want to know who those players are. And then the most important is to know whether your theater is either currently listed, and if it's currently listed, that makes it pretty easy. If it is not listed, then per Jason's outline, you'll need to go through the eligibility process with SHPO and obtain one of those eligibility determination letters that says, yes, your theater is eligible to be listed in the National Register. And you'll upload that into the form that we have on our website. And I'll walk through the process a little bit better. We're asking if you have any historic photos, if they are available, you provide copies of those, a current photo so we can see what your theater looks like today, a short, brief description of what you're thinking about for a project, and that can change. But for right now, what do you think you want to ask for, and how much money do you think you want to ask for? The way you'll submit all this information is through what we call our grant portal, and it's located on our website. in the footer of our website, there is the word grant portal, and you click on the grant portal, it will open another window where you create login information. And then once you've created the login information for your organization, you can log in and you'll see the Historic Theater grant application there, and you'll click on that. You'll have a dashboard, you'll click on it, and then just ask you question by question to walk through these questions for the letter of intent. And then always remember to hit submit button. These letters of intent are due May 1st by midnight. And then we will spend a week reviewing all those letters of intent, and anybody who meets the eligibility requirements of this subgrant program will be invited then to proceed with the application for the theater. So this really is a simple process to get people really just going in the process, get people moving, get people working on the eligibility, thinking about what you might want to apply for, how much money do you think you might ask, and then working with those who are truly eligible for this subgrant program going forward. And I'll answer any other questions you have at the end of the program. I'm going to hand it back over to Shannon, because the first thing that we're going to do after we've determined who is really eligible to apply for this subgrant program, the Idaho Heritage Trust will provide technical assistance for free. And I'm going to let Shannon, she'll be the one providing that assistance. So I'll let her know what she intends to do to help everyone.
Alrighty, well, I do hope that many of you do submit letters of intent and that I get to come visit your historic theaters. And what will happen is I will give you all, I'll contact you and schedule a time to come on site and to look at your resource, your historic resource, and look at your project or what your proposed project is. And what I will help is with any sort of scope definition that needs to happen surrounding making sure that you meet and have sufficient information to meet the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. And yes, that's a big word, but essentially we are looking for doing repairs, preservation, and working and doing good preservation projects that are enhancing the building as a historic resource, not necessarily making it something different. We want to look at things like what areas are going to be affected. Are certain historic resources being are the unaffected areas being protected sufficiently? When you are doing repairs, are you repairing in kind or with materials that are similar to the original materials that are being replaced? And that can be with everything from the actual material itself to the profile of that material. If we look at siding, or if we look at stair or trim profiles, those sorts of things, to make sure that you are repairing in kind and in shape, potentially even with historic colors or things that would be significant in a historic viewpoint and mindset. So, you know, we will look at those preservation standards and provide any sort of assistance that I can to make sure that you are meeting the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. Also, sometimes we will, depending on the project and what is proposed, we may look at scope and see if that scope of work really can be met with this project and with the budget that you are looking at. And, you know, if there are any other sorts of questions that may come up related to project readiness or kind of activating your project, there is a review process with the National Park Service, and that will be outside the control of the Idaho Heritage Trust. So there are steps where you will submit, it'll go to the National Park Service, they will review, it will come back to us. We may have a few conversations about what may or may not, or if any issues that may come up with that review process. And and go from there. There may be some creative thinking on our feet. There may be some working with architect and engineering, and we'll just see how it goes and take it at a case by case basis. We'll also look a little bit at the economic development potential, or how that project may enhance the community or economic development. And I will be assisted with that from other people at the Idaho Heritage Trust. But we do want to do video or photographic evidence of before and after of your project, because this is a big deal for Idaho, being able to run this grant program with the historic theaters. And we would like to capitalize on the ability of these theaters to really enhance the communities around them. And also the project relevance. I may help define the project or preserve a theater. It could be that, well, yes, this is the project that you would like to do, but really there is another project that should be done before we do this project. So there may be some evaluation of your project in terms of, well, what's going to be the most important project for saving or for working with your historic theater. Next slide.
Okay, so once we've gone through the technical assistance process throughout the summer, the actual subgrant application is due on August 15th at midnight. So we've got some time, and what we're trying to do is give you enough time to know what you need to prepare for, but also to provide some services to help you get there and be successful. We really want everyone to be successful in their application. So we want to help guide you if there are areas that you don't understand, that we can help you be successful in meeting those requirements. So that's a lot of what Shannon will be helping you with throughout the summer with the technical assistance. So once the grant application is submitted, and it is submitted the same way the letter of intent will be submitted through the grant portal, you'll log into your account, and on your dashboard, once you've been invited to proceed with the grant application, you will have visibility into the application questions. And the application content will include 4 areas. The first area is around the project description, and it has narrative questions, 5,000 word questions, 7,000 word questions. So they're paragraph style questions that address 4 areas of criteria. One is community impact, one is your project scope, one is feasibility, and one is geared towards sustainability. And Jerry, in a moment, is going to address each of those criteria, and so we'll get a little more detail into that, what each of those criterion are. And the second part of the application is about budget, and you'll provide a detailed breakdown of your proposed budget, estimating material, labor. If you have estimates from contractors, you'll have the ability to upload those. And if you've gotten so far as to obtain competitive bids, you can upload each of your bidders' proposals as well. The next section will be organization overview, and this is really just trying to understand the organization that's going to take on the project, a little bit about your mission and structure, a description. If it's privately owned, you answered it a different way than if you're a nonprofit, and that's all okay. If you're a nonprofit applying for the subgrant, then you'll need to upload your IRS determination letter that shows the proof of your 501c3 or any other type of nonprofit status as applicable. So that is all geared to each organization differently, or each business organization / private owner. And then there's an opportunity to upload photographs just focused on the area where your scope of work will occur. So for example, you're going to target your grant application towards restoring your neon marquee sign. Then you'll have lots of front elevation photos of the marquee. You may even have some close-ups where the marquee is cantilevered off the building and you have some rusted structural supports that need to be replaced. Whatever it is, just giving a good idea to people who are looking at your application who aren't there on site physically to be able to really see it. And realize that the people who are evaluating your application are all pretty technically savvy. So I'll turn that next step over to Jerry, and he can give you a breakdown of our reviewers and the process that we'll go through to review applications. And I can't hear you, Jerry. You'll have to turn
Yep,
off.
I mute myself.
There
Sorry
you
about
go.
that. Anyway, no, thank you, Catherine. And go ahead and take a second and take a deep breath because you're drinking from a fire hose here. But there were a couple questions about whether this information is going to be available. It really is available online on the website already for the most part, but this is an opportunity to review what's really being looked for and how it's going to be reviewed. Looking at this process with the grant the submission being due on August 15th, about a month prior to that, so mid-July, you have the opportunity to, after you've met with Shannon and looked at your project and being able to put all of your pieces together and get a good solid draft of your application together, you have the opportunity to, at your option, contact Catherine, Elizabeth at the office, and have them review that with you to make sure that you have all the pieces that you need, that you're not missing any important elements in your application. So then once that's submitted, then it will be reviewed by Idaho Heritage Trust for its completeness to make sure that the application is complete, everything's there as it should be, and that it's eligible to meeting the Park Service criteria and the criteria established in the grant application information, that it's eligible for technical evaluation. And it will be assessed based on the four criterion that Catherine had mentioned: the community input, project scope, the feasibility of the project, and the sustainability. That the committee that's going to review that will use, and I'll go through some of the questions here in a second, but that committee is made up of representatives of the Idaho Heritage Trust, both staff and board members, as well as representatives from the Idaho Historic Preservation Office, as well as the Idaho Department of Parks and Recreation. And so as they go through that, and they go through this criteria, there are four criteria, each are worth 25 points. And they'll go through, and each reviewer will review the project based on the criteria that we'll talk about. And then those will be scored. And then there'll also be an average score that will be taken from the collective group as well in their review. That review then, when it's done and they're compiled and there's a ranking based on that criteria and those assessments, and that will go to the Idaho Heritage Trust Board of Directors, and they will discuss those grants and make the final determination on recommendations for award. So looking at the criteria, the first one that Catherine mentioned, the community impact, your grant application doesn't need to be, on one hand, don't get too specific to these pieces. We want to know what all your project has to bear in the opportunities, the enhancement of the theater and the community. But don't get too far off into the weeds to where it makes it difficult for the reviewers to really see the impact of your project. So describing the level of need for revitalization and economic development, how are you in sync with the other entities within your community, both governmentally and privately as well? And what do you anticipate the financial impact of this project will be on the theater and the community? Think about, are there any associations or relationships with historically with underserved community members, whether it's Indigenous peoples, migrant workers in Twin Falls area, Japanese American prisoners during World War II. Did those connections exist? Do they still? Or even are they areas that can be considered? And then relative to the community, how is your project going to be perpetuated for future generations historically? What's it going to teach them? What's it going to provide for them? And then also defining what's the level of support that you have letters of support and that sort of thing from the community. What partnerships might you have? Are you partnering with another community entity that would help support and substantiate the impact of your theater? Next, Catherine. So the project scope, certainly this is the fundamental elements of your project, deciding what is the need and narrating that. Is there a threat or an urgency for this project to be done? It needs to be defined as well. The prioritization of the project is important. Just as an example, you wouldn't want to go in and restore some of the work within the ceilings within the auditorium or something like that, and have the roof be an issue. So the roof would be a first priority, then the ceiling, then the curtains. So you need to address that in how this project fits within your prioritization of projects within your development of your project. And then Shannon mentioned the Secretary of Interior standards. It's important that you read through that if you haven't, and you're aware of what is acceptable and what creates what's called an adverse effect that would deny your opportunity to go forward and have this be reimbursed. So it's important that you understand that and that doesn't create a hurdle down the road. And then how ready are you? Some of you I know have projects that all you need is the money. It's designed, it's ready, it's been established. And there are others who you might not even be sure exactly what your prioritization is or where to start. And that's where Shannon and the technical assistants will come in to help you define what your priorities are and how quickly you can move on those and how you would approach it. In the competitive bid process, within this, there are two parts. One is as a consultant. If your project is going to require an architect or a structural engineer or a consultant, because it's federal funding, as through the National Park Service, opportunity needs to be given to all qualified consultants and consultants and contractors to do the work. So that needs to be opened up and competitively bid with a request for proposals to the consultants, and that would be a request for qualifications, rather, a qualification-based selection process that the state of Idaho and others follow in public works. That the consultant, because the scope can vary a little bit, is defined on qualifications. So you'll submit that, you'll put out an RFQ, request for qualifications. They'll submit back to you, and then you'll have the opportunity to go through those and select them, the firm or the entity that you feel is most appropriate. With the construction, once you have a scope of work defined, then that needs to be opened up and advertised as well. And you would need to award to the low responsible bidder, just not the lowest, cheapest, dirtiest. It needs to be a low responsible bidder who has the qualifications and capability of doing the project correctly. And that's important because with the review process, with the SHPO and with the National Park Service, it's critical that you're following the standards and the guidance. That's not overwhelming. It's just good to know. It's critical to know up front. The third aspect or criterion is the feasibility of the project in illustrating the organization of your board or your group, if it's a private entity, what other associations do you have with other people, and what financial resources do you have, what technical experience do you have? Do you have if you're doing this and you have a structural engineer or a mason on your board, are they contributing to that to the development of your project? Also, the experience you've had with other grants, with Idaho Heritage Trust and or others, if you have experience with those, illustrate that. That helps to give some comfort to the reviewing entities that, yeah, you've done grants before, you understand the process, you have an accounting system together that will help manage that. so that it's transparent and clear. That's important. Then also, just as you do your budgets, they need to be detailed enough that it can be determined that yes, they're realistic, it's appropriate, it's a good use of spending these funds, and it can be easily tracked as well. And that would be important when you do, if you're doing a $100,000 grant and where it's reimbursement, if you have the commitment demonstrated, it may be that you're submitting for reimbursement at $25,000 a time or $10,000 a time as you go, so that you don't have to cash flow that whole thing up front, the whole 100,000. So that accounting program or protocol and your detailed line item budget is going to allow you to ask for reimbursement against things and give us the opportunity to review your progress relative to the funding requests. And then identify all of your sources, of course, what your match is, where it comes from. I would even add what your in-kind work is, what you think the value of that project is going to be. Sustainability, it doesn't do any good to put a lot of money into something if it doesn't have a future. And so it's important that that's defined. You know, how are you operating currently? And is this project going to impact and change the way you do things in your facility or within the community? We need to know that. I would talk about your existing program, but also, does this project enhance future theater programming and development? And also then, because this is a preservation grant, what's the long-term continued use relative to the preservation of the facility, not just performance and use? And then what other future restoration projects might you have that this may or may not support directly or indirectly? And then I know some of you are working on getting through the day and getting through the week and the month, and not sure what the end of the year is going to look like, but it's important that you think about that. This is a pretty good sized grant. These are good sized projects. So what's the future over the next 10 to 20 years for the theater? What's your vision? We want you to share that with us. So looking at the way that will be scored based on all of those criteria, we'll look at those and then determine if all of those questions are addressed, if it's clear and makes sense, it demonstrates that you can perform this grant and accomplish it, then of course it gets an excellent rating. The more there are questions, the more there are pieces maybe missing, or it's not as strongly preservation driven, it will be graded accordingly. So basically a 5 to 1 grading scale. And that's basically how that will be approached.
All right,
Catherine?
Thank you, Jerry. Appreciate it. And we're going over a lot of information today, and I want you to know that we also understand that historic theaters are not historic preservationists either. That's not your expertise. That's why we also want to make sure we can help you. All of us on this presenting this material have experience in historic preservation, and historic theaters, that's not your job. So please don't be frightened by it. We can help you through understanding and education of what some of these aspects mean to help you be successful. So award administration, once we've gone through the selection process and the board has selected the grant applicants that they choose to award a grant to, that list of selection will be sent to the National Park Service, and they will review, and hopefully no problems, will agree with us on our selection. So that's why the timing, why it will take from the time you submit your application August 15th through December. You won't hear whether you have been selected or not. We anticipate the notice of selection for funding will be revealed to people around December of 2023. If we come out sooner than that, fantastic. but there is some time period built into that process to ensure that the National Park Service in Washington, D.C. has the time to go through our submittals to them and approve those. So once you'll receive an email notification if you've been selected, and either way, you'll be notified what the decisions are, and you'll be asked to log into your dashboard again, where you'll find a number of documents and follow-up reports that will be required to be completed throughout the administration of your project. And I wanted to go over at a top level, just some of the requirements that you'll need to be aware of. So with the grant award agreement, there'll be, whether it's given to the grant applicant who may be not the property owner, it will be imperative that the applicant, the subgrantee, as well as who owns the building, must sign the grant agreement so that the property owner also agrees to the terms of conditions. Insurance, proof of general liability insurance will be required. And for nonprofit organizations, standard fire and extended coverage certificates of insurance will be required. I believe city organizations are exempt from that. Subgranting funding requirements. Jerry mentioned a number of federal regulations that we need to comply with because this is federal money that we are subgranting, and those will be captured in more detail on our website and in our grants program guidelines that we will have available soon for all of you to review. But at a high level, those are requirements that come out of the Historic Preservation Fund Grants Manual, the Title II Code of Federal Regulations, Build America, Buy America, and the Americans with Disabilities Act, just to name a couple of the subgrant requirements. Follow-up reports will require, photographic records, final report requirements for reimbursement. And then I also wanted to point out that there'll be some kind of a survey or follow-up report to show how the subgrant funding has contributed to any economic benefits for the theater and or the community. So have you seen an increase in your fundraising because of the work that was done over the period of years following the completion of the project? Or have you been able to hire additional staff because of the efforts made by this preservation grant funding? Or has it made an impact to the restaurant or the wine bar that's located next door to the theater? They're seeing an increase when we're putting on productions. Whatever it may be, we want to capture those wins and be able to report those back to the National Park Service. I'm sure this is part of what the National Park Service will want to report out to Congress in order to keep the funding going and the future of these grants to be available for all. So
Yeah.
for success.
Just
Jerry?
a quick question that Jerry Miller raised in the chat that's appropriate here, about whether this is Davis-Bacon prevailing wage rates.
There is a requirement for specific, but it's based on, hang on, I can answer it specifically. It's grade 15. It's really high. I looked at the costs. It's not going to be a big issue, I didn't think, based on Idaho wage scale. But I don't have it in front of me. Let me say this. I will follow up with an answer to that question to make sure I can answer it specifically. But yeah, there is a wage scale that the contractors can be no more than 20% within a specific grade scale of the federal guidelines. And I don't have that table in front of me, but that will be part of the grant guidelines, and I'll confirm that information before I publicize it for all of you. Is that good enough answer for today? I hope.
Sorry to sidetrack you there.
That's okay. Another part of the administration, the award administration, will be a National Park Service review. And I'm going to let Tricia Kennedy, our SHPO deputy, to address those questions. But this will occur once the grant award has been, or the grant award agreement has been signed. Tricia?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act this morning, and what that means for those of you who do receive a grant through this program. Section 106 of the grant essentially, or I'm sorry, of the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966 essentially says that if a federal agency has an undertaking that has the potential to impact historic properties, they are required to consult with our office or any state SHPO that is applicable in an effort to avoid, minimize, or mitigate adverse effects to historic properties. So we essentially, our office gives local voice to public federal action at the state level. A federal undertaking for the purposes of this law is defined as the use of federal funds, licenses, or permits, or action on federal land. So because these monies that are coming to this theater project through the Idaho Heritage Trust are originating with the National Park Service, and they are a federal agency, all of these projects are required to comply with Section 106 and go through this consultation process. It's important to understand that the consultation process is between our office, the State Historic Preservation Office, and the federal agency that has the undertaking. So while there may conversations may occur between us and the Idaho Heritage Trust, or between us and possibly even you as applicants, if you have questions going along, we are always available to answer questions. The actual consultation takes place between our office and the National Park Service as the federal agency involved in the project. So what does this mean for you? What it means is that nothing that you do with these funds may have an adverse effect to these historic properties. Now, in fact, and I won't get too far into the weeds, federal agencies are allowed to adversely affect historic properties. But in those cases, federal agencies are required to mitigate for those adverse effects, and there's a whole consultation process involved in that. With grants like this, positive preservation grants, the Park Service will not allow for an adverse effect to take place as part of your project. I am going to send in the chat to you, and this has come up a little bit briefly already. A link to the National Park Service's Technical Preservation Service website, where you can access the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. Those are the standards that we apply and that the Park Service will be applying to determine if your project is appropriately designed and will be appropriately executed so that no adverse effects will occur to the historic property. You know, these are general standards. There are 10 for each treatment. There are treatment standards for restoration, preservation, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. These grants do not allow for reconstruction projects, so those standards will not apply. What we typically use in our office are the treatment standards for rehabilitation. So I would suggest you take a close look at those. And the purpose of rehabilitation standards are that you know, they allow for the preservation of the character defining features. I think Shannon has mentioned those. But they also allow for the property to be brought up to current standards and code and comfort. So they're meant to bring buildings into contemporary times and make them continue to be usable for everyone and for everyone's comfort. So there are opportunities within the standards to make changes to historic buildings, but they need to be done in specific ways. One key standard that I think you will all want to keep in mind is that you repair elements where necessary and replace where it can't be repaired. The standards do not allow for the wholesale replacement for convenience purposes. So it's important that you keep that in mind. Because this is a grant coming from the National Park Service, the interpretation and application of the standards is going to be very stringent. And our advice to all of you is that you do not fight back against determinations made by our office or the National Park Service, because you will not win. If you submit a project proposal that is clearly contrary to the standards, you will be told that you will not be able to use the funding for that project. Another thing that's important to keep in mind is if the project as a whole, for the most part, meets the standards, but just one small element that's being proposed does not meet the standards, the project as a whole will not be funded. So the entire project must meet the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. There's a little bit of flexibility within them. I mean, they aren't entirely rigid, and there's a matter of applying how they're applied and interpreted. But I think our guidance to you would be to think about things, you know, from the end of the spectrum that's going to be more verbatim application, and not expect or hope that there will be a lot of wiggle room in these. I don't mean it to sound as ominous as it does, as I fear I'm making it sound, but it is something that it's very important that you be aware of, because there is not a lot of flexibility within this. And you know, if you think about it, this is what is required in exchange for this essentially free money. You know, you're getting this money from the federal government, and in exchange, you're saying, we are going to do this project the right way. We're going to treat this historic property in an appropriate manner that meets the standards. And it'll be a better project all around for those reasons. So there are steps to this process, but as you go along, working with the Heritage Trust, they will guide you through this process and the submissions with the Park Service in our office. But as I said, and my contact information is there on the slide right now. We are very happy to speak with any of you at any time if you have any questions or concerns, or are kind of moving along in the process thinking, well, here's what we want to do. I wonder if this is going to be acceptable. We're happy to answer those questions. Shannon Sardell is going to be your good friend in this process, because she understands the standards very well, and she will be able to guide you in a way that shouldn't leave anyone in a place where you're proposing something that can't be approved. So I think if we all work together and you work into the start the process understanding that these standards must be followed in all cases, then I think we'll all be set up for success. And we're excited to work with all of you and see these projects come to fruition. So I think that's all I'm going to say about that. But as I said, please feel free to reach out, either give me a call or send me an email, and we're happy to answer questions at any time. Catherine, you're muted.
Thank you, Tricia. So I'm going to address Jerry Miller's question real quickly regarding the federal contracting and procurement standards for this grant award. Maximum rates charged to this grant may not exceed 120% of the federal civil service GS 15 step 10 salary per project location. And there is a website that has where I'll provide the link to that website so you can see what that GS 15 step 10 salary is to be used for our area. So hopefully that answers the question. Oh no, what have I done? I'm going to go I clicked on the link. Okay, and the next part of our award administration is a requirement for a preservation easement. And I'm going to ask Dan Everhart, who's the expert in this area, to speak to that requirement. Dan?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Dan Everhart. I work for the State Historic Preservation Office. And there is a component of this program which requires the donation of a covenant or easement on your property, dependent upon the amount of funding that you receive through the grant program. So first of all, just ever so briefly, what is an easement? What most might think of an easement related to, I don't know, some sort of access to land. So you have a property, you sell off the back 10 acres, but the new owner needs a road access through your front 10 acres in order to get to the back. You give them an easement, or you sell them an easement in perpetuity to access that back property. So think of a preservation easement in similar ways. It is the gift of a certain amount of control over the aspects of the property that are in consideration here. In this case, an easement would be given for exterior elements of the building and potentially interior elements as well. So at least for the life of this easement, there would be a requirement by your organization, be it private or public, to consult with the State Historic Preservation Office on future projects. Again, these are future projects, not just the project for which you're receiving funds, but future projects through the life of the easement. And what is that? So the life of the easement is there are two ways. If you spend $50,000 or less, if that's your grant, you'll be required to enter into a 5-year minimum preservation agreement. This is not a formal easement, but rather an agreement with our office and with the Idaho Heritage Trust. If your grant exceeds $50,000, you'll be required to execute a 10-year minimum easement. This will be a legally binding document. Not that the agreement isn't, but this will be a slightly more complicated formal process registered with your county clerk. It will be essentially on the deed of the property during that 10-year course. So what that means is that you will be obligated to consult with our office and seek and receive the permission of our office for future alterations, again, during the life of that easement. This is intended to essentially maintain the investment that the federal government has made, that the National Park Service has made in your property. So you will be required to maintain the historic character and physical integrity of the building and communicate with SHPO regarding all future major projects that would impact the architectural or aesthetic integrity of the property within that 10-year window. It's more than just a communication. It is the seeking and receiving of permission from this office. So I just want to emphasize that while you will definitely be asking, the right people for assistance in determining what this current grant project will be. Absolutely, this current project must meet accepted federal standards in review by our office, by the Idaho Heritage Trust, and ultimately by the National Park Service. That's just this project. If you are a recipient of these funds, you will then have an obligation, either a 5-year or a 10-year obligation, depending on the amount of funds received in the future. So once your project is complete, that 5 or 10-year window will begin, in which you must seek and receive permission from our office in order to make future alterations to the building. And we can talk ad nauseum about this. I'm happy to answer questions at the end if we have them. But I think that's just the key elements to understand. It's an obligation to, yes, the current grant, but an obligation for future projects as well.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate that. So quickly, here's our timeline. I realize we have 10 minutes left within our Zoom call, so I'm going to go very quickly. I think the most important dates at this point are to note the May 1st letter of intent deadline. If you intend to apply for the grant, you need to submit a letter of intent. It's really basic, just confirming your eligibility to go further and apply for the grant, subgrant application. The subgrant application is due August 15th at midnight. And through the grant award notification, we anticipate to come out December 2023. And then the final report deadline for the completion of the project would be July 1st, 2025. So that's the timeline. And I've also invited a few other guests. I thought it was really important maybe to gather a little bit of information from other organizations that could help you with other grants to help support your overall goals. So a lot of this talk about economic development, we're focused on the physical structure of the building, but there's also this component of how that work will help the theater be able to survive longer and maybe be able to offer other programming. I wanted to introduce a few people who can give you information on other grant opportunities that might help supplement this grant opportunity with regards to programming and other information. So Jerry, I know you're on the call. Jerry, would you like to take a couple of minutes to quickly talk about other grant opportunities?
Sure. And the first thing I want to do is I want to throw out a shameless plug for our Idaho Commerce newsletter called Show Me the Money. We put this out once a month, and we try to feature grant opportunities, especially grant opportunities like what we're hearing today, especially for those types of projects that we can't necessarily fund with grants that we offer at Idaho Department of Commerce. Best way to get onto that newsletter, it's free, is go to the Commerce website and sign up for our newsletters there. So there's that. I manage one of Commerce's grant programs called the Idaho Gem Grant Program. This is a program that awards grant funds for economic development projects to communities that are of 10,000 population or less. We can use these funds to help build out what we call in the program publicly owned assets. So these are going to be assets that are owned by a city, county, a governmental entity, or a nonprofit organization. So just to give you an example, we recently awarded a GEM grant to the city of Sandpoint for work on the Pineda there in Sandpoint, and so we can partner up with other grants, with GEM grants. Now, the other thing you need to know about GEM grants is that they are state-funded grants. They're not considered federal grants, so they don't come with any sort of the federal requirements that we just heard about. But because they are non-federal, they can be used to match other federal funds, and that's not always the case with grants. Typically you can't use other federal grants to match other federal grants, but this is a program that can do that. We prefer to be last dollar in. So if we're looking at a project, doesn't matter what the project is, we want assurances that you have your other matching funds in place before we will consider making an award, and that's because we're under tight requirements from the Department of Financial Management to get our projects done quickly and not have grants open more than 24 months, etc. Our deadlines, we do a quarterly deadline, so usually it'll be the third Monday of June, third Monday of September, third Monday of December, and the third Monday of March. If there's a project that we can't fund, we'll try to help you find other funding opportunities for that particular project. Yeah, if you have any questions, you can just reach out to me, and we can have a broader conversation about if a GEM grant's right for your project. One other grant program I want to throw out a shameless plug for is a program offered by the cell phone provider T-Mobile. They have a community granting program that they do on a quarterly basis. Once again, this is a program that is targeted towards rural communities, so you won't be competing with the Boise's and the Nampas of the world if you apply for these funds. And the types of things that they like to fund with this particular program are placemaking kind of things. So I think theaters would fall right into that. So that's all I'm going to say for now, and I'll turn it back to Catherine.
Thank you, Jerry, and I apologize for not getting your contact information. So I'll make sure I follow up with everybody with that contact info for you to reach out to you. The next person I'd like to introduce is from our Idaho Commission on the Arts, Allison Espindola. Are you available, Allison? You still on our call?
Yeah, I'm still here. Thank you so
Great.
much, Catherine. And you got my last name right. That's amazing. Most people don't.
Yay.
Fantastic. Well, hi, everybody. My name is Allison. I'm with the Idaho Commission on the Arts, and we have a few different granting opportunities. Before I kind of dig into them, and I'll share a link to those, I do want to just follow up with what Jerry said. The Show Me Your Money, Show Me the Money newsletter is phenomenal. And if you don't follow Jerry on LinkedIn, you should, because you will get all sorts of amazing resources as soon as he pretty much learns about them. So highly recommend. For the Commission on the Arts, we have a couple of different granting opportunities, and I see some of our grantees on the call today. So that's so exciting to see you guys all here. We have what's called public performance in the arts and entry track grants, which are our annual support for arts organizations, and theaters do fall into that category. We also have quarterly grants that have a quarterly deadline, and those ones are for project specific type things. So I'm going to throw in the chat really fast a link to our grants webpage where you can learn and kind of dig in and see some more of the granting opportunities. We did have our quarterly grants deadline for March just finish, but we have another quarterly grant that's coming up in June. Our annual grants are in January. So time to work on those applications and get your stuff together if you want to check that out. And I think Jerry's mention about T-Mobile is fantastic. Another one is AARP has another really great community resource grant. So if you wanted to jump on and check out AARP's grant, if you're looking for other funding sources too. And I'll throw my contact info in the chat as well. So if you have any questions related to the arts, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to answer questions and help how I can. Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you, Allison. And Jerry, can I ask that request of you as well? Would you put your contact information in the chat? I appreciate it. Doug Exton, the program manager with the Idaho Humanities Council, is not able to join us this morning, so I've got his contact information in the presentation itself. But the Humanities Council also has major grants available for planning and supporting public programs which involve humanities. And so theaters, I just encourage you, when you start to think about new programming and or new ideas for programming, that's another grant that could be a potential opportunity to help you fund some of those new programming ideas. So with that, I think that concludes our presentation. So I'd like to make sure that we've addressed all questions. If you want to, Elizabeth, can I ask you to run through the chat and ask the questions that have been asked that we have not yet addressed? Is she there? Elizabeth, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I think everything has been addressed so far. There was a question about the PowerPoint being mailed out after the meeting. Which I believe, yes, it will be. And then
Yes, it will be. Sorry.
it's
Yes, the PowerPoint will be available as a link on our website. And once we also will have a full written document that is the Subgrant program guidelines. And once that is completed, we're waiting for a final review from NPS. But once we've got their sign off on that final, that will also be a link out on our website that you can click on and download the PDF. So you'll have everything we've talked about in more detail today with more detail on requirements located in that PDF as well. And once I've put them out on our website, I'll send an email to all of you so you know, hey, this is out there now. You can go ahead and download it. So those that both will be available for you.
Perfect. And then the only other question was addressed earlier. And if anyone else hasn't seen the chat yet and haven't put what theater you're from, if you could go ahead and do that, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to wrap up and just say thank you so much. I have so much gratitude for so much support to have joined us for here today. I mean, I'm so excited about this grant opportunity, and I know there are a lot of requirements and there's a lot to it to get your head around on a first blush. But the potential to have such a large impact in our state of Idaho and our rural communities is so awesome that I'm really excited about it. And we look forward to talking further about, huge celebrations. We're going to do, as Shannon mentioned briefly, we're going to do video footage of the before, and we're going to do video footage of the after. We're going to create a little movie about this whole grant and the theaters and celebrate the theaters that have accomplished what they will accomplish with this subgrant program. And we hope to have some big ceremonies with some special people there and really celebrate. So we're looking forward to working with all of you. I would encourage all of you to please take this grant seriously. If you have any questions whatsoever, you can reach me at the Idaho Heritage Trust. The contact information is in the slide. And if there are no other questions, I just thank you for joining us, and this concludes our program. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.